Hey, welcome back once again. Another day, another episode of Tales from the Stash. Today I'll be talking about this. This is actually a special boxing here. I have in my hands, which was the Hasegawa 148 scale F-104 Starfighter. First all-new F-104 Starfighter kit we've seen in quite a long time. Let me give you a brief history on the Starfighter. It was actually one of the many designs of the Century series from Lockheed. We know Lockheed for their F-117 stealth fighter, the S-71 Blackbird, the P-38 Lightning, and of course the C-130 Hercules. They come up with some pretty interesting designs. The F-104 I believe, was intended to be an interceptor. It was also one of the first to be given the 20mm Vulcan cannon, which was then being designed by I think General Electric, if I'm not mistaken. It was designated M61. And yeah, it was pretty interesting aircraft. The design was pretty sleek for the time. It had the small stubby wings. Basically, its nickname was a missile with a man in it. And it was also intended to be, it was actually not intended, I should say. It was also used by majority of NATO, with the exception of Britain and France at that time, which was into the late 50s, early 60s. Even though it was an interesting design, it was supposed to be ready in time for the Korean War, but that didn't quite happen. A lot of research and development, much like the rest of the Century series. That's the way it goes. The aircraft outside of NATO, it wasn't used by the United States for very long. It was maybe for and it was only in smaller amounts as compared to the rest of the Century Series aircraft. But it was used, like I said before, it was used a lot by NATO, with the exception of France and Britain. It was also operated by Jordan, if I'm not mistaken, Pakistan, Taiwan, Japan, Spain, and I don't remember who else, but if I remember, I'll let you know. And it was also used by NASA, of course, for a lot of research, a lot of studying. Like I said, it's a pretty interesting aircraft. However, it was not a very forgiving aircraft to fly. It was actually really difficult to fly if you didn't know what you were doing. It had a pretty high accident rate, and it was also used in another role that it was not supposed to be, which was fighter bomber. Even though it was just intended to be a daytime, I believe it was a daytime interceptor and a fighter. The way it was designed, it was not intended to yank and bank like the Phantom or even the F-106. Let's see. Well, anyway, back to its use in service with the rest of NATO. NATO is an acronym for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was supposed to counteract the Soviet Union and its allies, blah, blah, blah. And the F-104 was also used, as I said many times before, sorry for the repeating, but its accident rate was very high, particularly for West Germany, because West Germany at that time was just starting to reemerge as an air force again, like the Bundesluftwaffe, or the West German Air Force, or Federal Air Force. Federal Air Force of Germany, I don't know. Me and words do not get along very well. And unfortunately, its accident rate was very, very high, and if not a little higher. So, I don't know if it's because of inexperience or it's because of the aircraft itself. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, its accident rate in NATO was very, very low for Norway. And even though Norway didn't have that many aircraft, the weather conditions in Norway were actually a little more rough than they were in Germany. And other countries had varying degrees of success. But in the right hands, the F-104 can hold its own, and it was a pretty formidable aircraft. Just, unfortunately, it required a good pilot to know it. Anyway, so we're done with that. Back on to the kit form. I've only built one F-104 Starfighter kit my entire life. And I'm a big fan of the Century series, particularly the Cold War era. As I've said many times before, and the Century series was particularly intriguing because during that time in the 50s, when everything was aviation technology was rapidly advancing, there was just some things that just quickly became obsolete. Some things were ahead of the time. I don't know but back in kit form, in 1/32, I built the old SE kit, which was a nice kit, a very nice kit. But that was about it. I've never really touched it outside of that. I've been intrigued by it, but never really touched with a 10-foot pole. In 1/48 scale, you had the old SE kit. I think Revell made one. I know Hawk did. Then, for a time, it was the Monogram kit, which was a pretty decent kit by many means. And it was okay, but it could have been better. You got to keep in mind, it was the limits of injection molded plastic technology at the time, and this was before AutoCAD and everything else. So, despite all that, it was a really decent kit. Otherwise, the other alternatives weren't that great. Of course, 1/32 scale, you had Revell and Hasegawa. So it was a while before an all-new F-104 kit in 48 scale came out. Well, Hasegawa finally put one out. They put it. I don't know if they put the whole series out, but I do know they put the major ones. The F-104C, the F-104G, of course the two-seaters, like the TF-104G, which can be converted into other trainer variants, and of course the F-104J. And they've also periodically reboxed special editions, like one for Taiwan, NATO, West Germany, Denmark, Norway, so on and so forth. Special markings for the United States Air Force. And of course, they released their own, which was the F-104J, which you can get away with as an F-104G if you know the research right. And it's a really, really nice looking kit. It's a big improvement. I actually got to look at it, and I finally caved in and bought one. Because I have I got plans for something. I got little side projects I want to do for someone. And I don't know if it'll ever happen. I'm hoping it will. I know a couple people that can print their own decals, or I can go to a place that can print them for me. But it's going to be pretty simple. So, let's pop open the kit, and let's get a look at everything here. As I said before, this is a special edition. So, even though the instructions are basic, we'll go into that later. Here's the decals, by the way. This is clear parts here. Of course, landing lights, other clear parts for I don't know. I only got a quick thumb through of everything, but you can tell. These are the parts. No mold seam lines, so this makes life a lot easier. And it's, like I said, the scribing's petite. It's fine. Vinyl caps. I think these are for the landing gear, if I'm not mistaken. It's typical Hasegawa. It's nicely done. Details very good. Here's the landing gear bay, of course. Here. Cockpit tub. This exhaust is actually for the earlier F-104. I think the F-104C, if I'm not mistaken. The F-104 Starfighter did use the General Electric J79. Yes, the same one that was used by the F-4 Phantom, and was also used by the B-58 Hustler, as well as the Israeli-built Kfir, which we'll talk about more. Well, not the Kfir itself, but we'll talk about more about other aircraft in the future. Ventral fin here. This is the combing right here for the cockpit. Of course, more parts. This is the nose section, fuel tanks. This is for the later F-104 right here, if you can see right. There you go. Parts for the fuel tanks. The fuel tanks seem a little too complicated, but it's nothing I haven't dealt with before, especially if this is the landing gear here. Exhaust. Hasegawa, there really isn't any other way to really lay out an F-104 Starfighter unless somebody else figures it out. I know Italeri put out an all-new one. Here's nose gear, main gear here, some struts, tail hook. There's your nose gear tire, a couple other parts. Seems a lot of work is going to be involved on this. Parts for the ejection seat, if I'm not mistaken, is right here. One of the parts fell out. They're actually in the box, so I don't have to worry about that. There's your instrument panel. As far as I know, this is all generic. So if you're going to, unless they have one specific for that, for example, Air Italia out of Italy, they license built the F-104 Starfighter, so it might be some varying differences in the cockpit. I know there's obvious external differences. Check your references on that. If you're, here's the wings. The scribing's good. It is actually really, really good. Before I go to the wings, I'll show you the fuselage first. This is for one half of it. There's your nose section. Intakes. this is the fuselage right here. If you can see it right, scribing is actually nicely done. It seems a little overdone because of the riveting. I used to have a book on the F-104 Starfighter. I don't know if it's a little much. Personally, if I don't like it, I can always fill them in. Might be time consuming, but it'll be worth it. Fortunately, Tamiya makes a surface primer where all you gotta do is just paint a little bit here and there and it'll be fine. Or if you're good with automotive filler primer, you can always use that. But it seems fine to me. The detail seems just fine to me. Like I said, you don't like the riveting, you can always try to fill it in. Here's the other half of the fuselage. You can tell that the wings aren't so much wide. This gives you an idea of the F-104 Starfighter. This is the lower half of the wings. Sorry about that. And there's your upper half. This is what I mean by small wings, long body, or a missile with a man in it. Once again, even though the wings are nicely done, the riveting's a little excessive. You can get away with a coat of paint, so most of it might go away with paint. Or if you use a primer like I do, you can use them and then paint over. Matter of fact, there's flaps. There's the tail fin here, as you can see. A lot of riveting, of course. And of course, here's the rest of the parts for the kit itself. This is your exhaust section, the tailpipe. There's your rails for missiles and for the underside. Of course, since you could build this not this one as a two-seater, you could build the F-104 two-seater. They actually provide an extra control stick, if I'm not mistaken, right here. 1 and 2. And of course, the main gear tires. Also, they give you options for spoked or non-spoked. You always check your references if you're not sure about things. Those are the rest of the parts here. Depending on what version you get of the Starfighter kit, you're going to get different markings. Since this one is a special boxing, I think this was privately owned, Red Baron, trying to set a speed record. I don't remember offhand. Do your reference on that one. I'm going to have to look it up too. There's your decals right here. I'm kind of leery with Hasegawas decals, especially, fortunately, these are all white. Hasegawa has a habit of doing decals slightly off-white, but it's another story for another day. The airframe itself is supposed to be red. Of course, here's the instructions, typical. Even though the picture and this shows different, the instructions, depending on what variant you're building, it's all the same. Gatefold, half English, half Japanese, since Hasegawa also imports in the United States. As you can see here, typical Hasegawa. Callouts are for Mr. Color and Akuya's Hobby Color. Sorry about the hesitation, had to stop and think. Here's your decal placement. Let's see if I can find the color guide. Sorry if the paper's a little light. Like I said, typical color call out here. If you have fortunately the GSI Krios paints, most of them, with the exception of a little bit here, the exception of certain colors, most of them you can cross-reference through the federal standards, since GSI Krios has the federal standard numbers marked next to the paints, so cross-reference, not hard at all. And if you have the proper research, you can do more. And I do recommend having reference books or going online to check everything out on this, because there's little subtleties between each variant. Like I said, Italy licensed built the F-104. As good as the kit is, it does have its flaws. Like I said, it seems a little there's some saying it's a little off here and there. I don't see the difference between that and the Revell monogram kit. Well, outside of raised panel lines and a little bit of fit tackling from Revell monogram. But otherwise, it's a really, really nice kit. It really is. And if you're not happy with the decals or you had to go get a special boxing, there's plenty of aftermarket decals available. I know Daco products out of Europe probably got a whole bunch of them especially for the European F-104s. I mean, they do stuff for the F-16. They probably do stuff for the Starfighter. Microscale, of course, Superscale. I'm sure there's other companies that threw a whole bunch out there. Probably Eagle Strike or Airmaster. if you can find them. Now, this video is going to be a two-parter. The reason why I say that, because despite this, Daco Products actually put out a improvement and completion set, which I'll talk about in the next video, which is right here. This is a little excessive. I'll tell more about it later in the next video. Hopefully it'll be back to back. But wow. And I mean, the kit's actually just fine out of the box. The only one I really say would require a little bit of work if you were to build the Italian F-104. That's the only variant that would require research and a little bit of extra work. And Hasegawa didn't quite cover that. They'll do everything to a certain point, and then they'll just half-ass it from there. Most companies do the same thing, so I really can't blame Hasegawa for that. And like I said, there's little subtle differences. Slightly bigger intakes, a couple of extra fins, the options of weapons. That's a whole different story. So, but it should get very, very interesting because eventually I'm going to build that kit. Eventually. Yeah, once I get out of my funk and I start picking and choosing what I want to do. And hopefully when my kids get older, I'll have more time. But this one, we'll talk about this in a future video because talking about the Hasegawa kit, it's a two-parter. And it's going to get I'm going to be, I don't know. I don't know. I'm at a loss for words right now. So this is all I got for now. Happy modeling. Take it easy, guys. And hopefully part 2 will be up soon. So have fun. Enjoy the day.